Ollie, I'll hand the ball over to you first. Is there a name that's absolutely, you've been combing through these teams, team by team, is there a name who's screaming out to you, just think people are sleeping on that guy? This year is going to be sensational for them.
I don't know if it's necessarily sleeping on. I think TJ Hockenson in Detroit is in a really interesting spot. We often see these tight ends take a little bit of time, and he was pretty fantastic in the final year with Matt Stafford. He's probably the closest thing, height, weight, speed, kind of impact in 2-3 phases of an offense to Travis Kelce, I would say. And I think the offense, the final year Stafford was limiting for him, but he was excellent in it. Then they moved to this new setup where I think it fits him a bit better, but he's playing with Jared Goff, so it's not quite as good. But then you start looking around the Lions offense and you go down play by player. One, the line is just stacked, which is unusual. They have maybe not the best pair of starting tackles, but it's so good as to not make much difference between, if you whoever you think is 1 and 2 to if they're at 3, 4, 5, 6, it's excellent, and that's all that really matters. Then you've got Jameson Williams, who's obviously going to be the Tyreek Hill type player. They bring in DJ Chark. Amon St. Brown was outrageously good last year. They still have DeAndre Swift. If you cannot find space, and that's what this offense is about, pressing everything down the field so you can clean up underneath, that's where TJ Hockenson should be his absolute best, short stuff, and then yards after the catch, or just bullying people at the intermediate level. I could see not quite Kittle-ish because he's such a special player, but people looking around and going, okay, Gronkowski's on the decline. Maybe Kelce is, starting to go on his way out this year and next season. The next guy up will be Hockenson.
I think there is an argument that because Jared Goff plays the most important position in sports, that could limit you. But they have set him up to succeed in a way that almost nobody else is. You mentioned it, like how a team that picks that high in the draft has a line as good as theirs does. It's normally the place you immediately look to. They draft a wide receiver. They bring in DJ Chark. Amon-Ra St. Brown looked absolutely sensational down the stretch last year. I love this offense. And actually, Hockenson, if he doesn't have to do too much of the blocking, if he can just be the guy that gets outside and lines up all across the formation, I think is a sensational shout. And again, for me, it kind of, I mentioned it before, it comes down to this idea of opportunity. I had a little look through like some of the suggestions for fantasy breakout candidates for this year, because obviously on those skill positions, there's quite an obvious line between those. And you have guys where you think about like Rashad Bateman in Baltimore coming through in his second year, guys coming through who maybe like there was an obvious person in front of them who were taking those opportunities away, who has now disappeared. Rondale Moore, when you've got the departure of Christian Kirk, plus the suspension for DeAndre Hopkins, I thought he showed flashes of brilliance last year. Now you're going to be a guy who has to take a lot of the opportunities. I think if you start off really hot for a guy like one of those two, when you've had the clear obstacle in your way from being the main man is not in your way right now, then those are a couple of guys I think could break out immediately.
Yeah, the big thing I think from Hockenson is that the OC was the tight end coach. And so not necessarily that magically makes that position better, but it does mean when they're game planning, he's probably going to always start the film with his eye on the tight end position. That Ben Johnson's been a tight end coach all over the league as a young guy. Just that idea of doing the Graham thing, as you mentioned, moving all around the formation. And they didn't run a lot of isolation stuff last year. And usually when you bring up isolation, you think of something that's plodding and maybe doesn't fit so well. But if you think back to those Saints Graham's teams, I mean, that was just bombs away, and he's lit people up 40 points a game for fun because they had better players. So you can isolate when you have better players. And when you have Jameson Williams, who no one can keep up with, and Hockenson can box everyone out, and then all the other pieces we've mentioned there, running an isolation style, I think works quite well for them. So it's a really tough one. They should be good. You go through that team, they should be good. I think Aaron Glenn is unbelievable DC at making week-to-week adjustments. The way he changed that defense at the midpoint of last year, where he was like, all of this stinks. What I want to run doesn't work. Let me run what works instead of what I want to run, was a major shift, and they became really good towards the end of the season. Then, as you mentioned, that offense should be good, and you're just hoping, well, Jared Goff cannot be that bad. It's not possible, because we saw him when he had a ton of pieces be not, someone who just drove the car into the ditch, as it looked like at times last season, that Steelers game being the famous one where he just looked like he didn't know how to play football. They should be good. I don't know. It's a strange one for me. I feel like they should be good.